Hello, everybody. You probably know me. I've been around, not as often as I would like, but I've been around. Okay, so I'm here today to do like a part one for this general and rather broad and rather large topic that honestly requires 2 sessions to properly handle together. Because here's my train of thought. Here's my reasoning. There is this study of shamanism, both academic and as a personal spiritual practice. And there's also the beliefs of shamanism, which can get very complicated, very broad, and cover many different cultures. And then there is the practice itself, which while equally multifaceted, can also require its own space. So what I'm doing today is just, I would say, a slight introduction with some examples, with some relevant details that will help you further explore and research the topic for yourself. Personally, my journey in shamanism now is, well, I would say in the decade. I forget exactly when I began studying it. And while I haven't followed it and pursued it every single year of my life since then, it has come to be an integral core part of who I am as a pagan magic practitioner and just a pagan person. So my journey really begins in grad school as an anthropology student. So I was getting a lot of the cultural information up front, and I was super, super intrigued with the practices themselves and the beliefs themselves, and of course, the cultures. I was already training to be a witch, so as soon as I was able to, I just jumped headfirst into the great vast sea that is currently known as shamanism. So what you're going to see today is that point of view. Okay, you're going to see some academic discussion because I believe it is a good foundation to have to know where these practices and beliefs are coming from. And you're going to see as well some of the spiritual understandings that have formed in the more recent times. So let's begin with some historical background. Here goes, I turn on my academic brain and off we go. So it was shamanism itself is a word that has only been in use for a few hundred years, since 1692, even though it is sometimes attributed to the words used by Tunguskic and Samoyedic speaking peoples of Siberia and the continental Arctic, that being Scandinavia and Russia. It is disputed as to its origins itself. What is known is that the traveler Nicholas Whitson and then many other travelers in the very late 1600s brought and wrote about those cultures and their beliefs and practices using the word shamanism. You can Google and research the etymology of the word itself. I find it incredibly interesting how many twists and turns it has taken. But it is a word originally meant for the beliefs and practices of the Siberian people, the indigenous Siberian people of the area. Since then, academics, who were the first ones interested in researching the topic, kind of applied it rather loosely to all sorts of different traditional practices throughout the world. It didn't quite matter so much where they were coming from or what the practice itself was. It was just applied for the purpose of understanding. This caused a bit of misunderstanding of what was implied in each particular case, because as we all know, each culture is somewhat different from all the other cultures. We can have many commonalities, and this is true for neighboring cultures as well as for distant cultures, but there's also dissimilarities, unique facets that get brought up, explored, and elaborated within every culture that make it the rich human tapestry and the rich human story that we all share. So because of this, because of trying to understand so many different cultures with the same label and with the same criteria, so many of the complexities were lost. And you have to understand what time period this is. This is post 1692, the 18th century, the 19th century. A great deal of belittling and colonial attitudes were present here that sought to diminish the validity of what the researchers were exploring and seeing. I'm sure that this story is familiar to many of you, as it also happened to our own people in the European mainland and in the rest of the Mediterranean world in response or in the opinions of the old pagan and mystical practices that we sometimes practice today. Very similar treatment here. So recently though, and we have been updating our understanding of shamanism, but more specifically animism is the reason that I underlined it in the slide before. It's more or less started with the work of an anthropologist named Hallowell, Irvin Hallowell, who studied the Ojibwe in Canada, focused on their culture and their views and their attitudes towards the world, and began to sort of dispel some of the myths that anthropologists and researchers have taken for granted in using the words animism, shamanism, and so on. We're beginning to discover that there is a great degree of sophistication in these very ancient and non-Christian beliefs and practices. A great degree of nuance when it comes to the relationships between people and their environments, people and each other, and the spirits that are embedded within that environment, and how one thing relates to the other. Nuances that may seem somewhat familiar to us pagans, looking for all the inspiration that we can possibly get in our day and age, but certainly surprised many of the anthropologists and researchers as of the last century. I want to specifically refer to here the word ontologies. It's in the second to last line of the slide. It's a philosophical term that may be somewhat confusing to some people. An ontology is just a branch of metaphysics, which is the philosophy of finding out or explaining or exploring the way things are. And it is particularly concerned with the nature of being. So how are humans humans? What makes us human? How is a plant? And of that particular type of plant, what makes it unique and what makes it similar, and how are we all related? So again, it's a concept, it's a network of concepts of relationship. Here. So to give you some flavor, I'm going to include a whole lot of pictures whenever possible. I trolled the internet for these pictures, and I hope I have brought you something interesting for your eyes and your mind. We have here a Sami shaman, which is indigenous to the northern part of Scandinavia. These are separate people with a separate entity from the Norse that we come to know in much later times. They're also still around for the most part and still holding on to those traditional beliefs. And much like the native people of our country, they faced a great degree of discrimination and ridicule because of their beliefs. The second picture down, the smaller square, the drawing rather, actually comes from Whitson's original account in 1692. So this is possibly representing the dwellings of the Tungusian and Samoyedic people that he spent time with, and the traditional dress of the medicine person of that area. And of course, you see the mallet, the drum, antlers, very familiar images that we might recognize today regarding shamanism. And the bigger picture, it's a recolored photograph, rather old photograph, of a person from the Pacific Northwest, tribal descent from the Pacific Northwest, performing a healing ceremony on a sick individual. So we can see some of these commonalities, right? We can see some of these interesting images that speak to us in an old language, something that we remember. It evokes something within us. It is so drastically different from our lived Western experience that we become attracted to it, right? One of those things that has been updated is the somewhat erroneous belief that shamanism was the first religion from which all other ones branched off of. So the researchers, in their great condescension, labeled it as sort of like the primitive offshoot from which we all evolved, ignoring all the complexities that are sometimes lacking in our modern faiths. To say that shamanism is the first religion is like saying praying is the modern religion of the world, just because it's what the Abrahamic faiths do most of the time. This is, of course, not correct. Shamanism is what the people do, is because that is how it has been characterized. Now, it's important to realize and to keep in mind that each culture, whether modern or ancient, however you're going to study this, whether you're looking at very, very, very ancient culture groups or people who are still around practicing their old faiths, they're all unique and they have very specific beliefs and practices that are answers to their lived reality, are adaptations to where they live and how they thrive. So another thing to understand is that they're very syncretic and pluralistic, all right? No either pagan or shamanic culture in the past would be so strict as to only follow their own way. You know, they will incorporate whatever it is they see respectfully that works for them, whatever technique they can learn from sister or brother cultures that they encounter. But in essence, there was no pan-shamanic religion in the ancient world. There might have been some commonalities, but as we're going to see, there was also a lot of differences from culture to culture. So here are some more examples of existing, current, modern, present day shamanic cultures, some of which can be very, very ancient. For example, the cultural practices and beliefs of the Australian Aboriginal people in Australia. Their culture was essentially unrelated, detached from the rest of the world for the most part for some 6,000 years. For 60,000 years since they got to Australia, there was some contact with the cultures nearby. As you know, ship travel and maritime exploration has been a thing since the BCs in all the cultures of the region. But for the most part, they had their own unique culture. And it is in fact this link to the oldest culture, the oldest language, that we can see glimpses of how these beliefs and practices may have existed and developed over time. In the first picture, this is a Plains native medicine person. You can probably recognize the dress and the accoutrements. We have Mongolian shamans in the middle. I believe, I mean, if I'm not wrong, that person has gone through some ritualistic ordeal and is being tended to by its elders for possibly for the acquisition of healing, of esoteric knowledge, or something of the sort. And very similar to what we saw of the Northwest Pacific people, there seems to be some sort of healing ceremony happening in this other picture over here, which depicts the Aboriginal culture. So here's a couple of case studies. This one I heard from a friend who was himself taught and helped to understand the Lakota belief systems, some of them anyway, before moving on to others. Grandfathers, I mean, all stones are to be considered the grandfathers, just like Mother Earth is our mother. Grandfathers as stones are these entities that must not be disrespected, for example, kicked or cursed at, definitely not damaged in any sort of way. And of course, we know this is technically not scientifically true. From what we know of human biology, some degree of minerals come to us from the stones and minerals in the earth, but as far as life and genetic information, there seems to be a distance. But how does this idea help the people, the Lakota people, integrate other cultural and ecologic understandings about their world around them, right? I'm not gonna put it at the same level because nowadays many people deride the idea, but how does Santa Claus help Christian children eventually believe in God? It is a similar idea that while all beliefs may not be necessarily scientific, rational, and provable, there are some degree of coalescing, of learning that happens where all these beliefs are linked together to create a higher point of view, a great cosmology, if you would. I particularly know this one, even though we perhaps cannot trust too much the accounts of the Spanish chroniclers that first came to the area of here, South Florida. We're talking about the Calusa people, who were primarily in the Fort Myers region, even though they had political sway and spiritual sway over all of South Florida. They believed, among many other things, that part of one soul reincarnated into the animals that lived around them. First, the animals they valued as the highest status, like panthers and deer and alligator and so on. But if those animals were killed, then the soul will then reincarnate in other quote unquote lower animals they deemed lesser, probably because of some understanding of food webs or trophic levels, until there were nothing but flies, gnats, mosquitoes, and other vermin. And at that point, the ancestor was degraded to such a degree that great ceremony had to be done to atone for the rampaging of their descendants through the natural world. If this doesn't just speak for an ethic of sustainability within the Calusa people, I don't know what does. It is a very complicated and it is a very nuanced take on how we ought to behave in the world around us. The Calusa people, coincidentally, also believed that people had 3 parts of the soul. And this might start sounding somewhat similar to those of us who have studied, for example, Egyptian ideas of the soul and reincarnation and survival in the afterlife. But so there is this one soul, this soul that goes on to animals That soul was called to be the shadow, literally the shadow you cast. That is part of your soul. Then there is another soul which lived in your iris, in your eye. That was the self soul, like the part of you, or perhaps roughly equivalent to an ego. And that soul was also a reincarnating part. It came from your ancestors. So if a person looked a lot like an ancestor, or behaved a lot like another ancestor, they would also be named, because they would be recognized as the reincarnation of that dearly departed person. And finally, there was the immortal soul, which was your reflection. And that is how you were seen in the moments of your truest self. That soul got to be lifted up to heaven, where the sun god lived. And they just, ecstatic afterlife and so on. Okay, so that's just some ideas. So I was saying, there are some dissimilarities here. We cannot just paint with a broad brush. Here we have, again, a reenaction, sort of a recreation of homage being paid to the Calusa chief. In this case, I believe it is Carlos I, or perhaps the second. During the time of Spanish contact, this lives in the Museum of Natural History in Gainesville. Beautiful exhibit. I totally recommend everybody goes and visit. The middle one is a haka dance, a Maori haka dance, being performed not just by men, but also by women. The fierceness of the expressions was meant not just to intimidate the opponent, but also the guardian spirits that the opponents fought with. You scare them off the battlefield, because you let the spirits that came with you and your ancestors channel through you to essentially banish the enemies. And then, of course, they would lose courage and run away. And finally, we have a ceremony of Yoruba elders, which is the diaspora religion that eventually becomes part of so many different Afro-Caribbean religions here in the Caribbean and the New World, so to speak. I consider it shamanic because of the practices involved in it. And we're going to work a little more on that definition in a minute. So some people, of course, do see the commonalities and may attempt to reconstruct. And here we have sort of a blended ceremony, if you will, as some European descended folk learning from the Siberian people, possibly Mongolian people, in fact, how to carry on ceremony in their ancient traditions. So this is also the premise of Michael Garner, which you may have heard of. He is rather a big name in the core shamanic movement, or the modern shamanism. I will like to say, though, that while core shamanism, as invented by Garner, is the bulkiest group, it is like saying Wicca by Gerard Gardner. It is the biggest group, but not the only group, and not the only thought when it comes to shamanism. But it is possibly the one you're going to find when you go to the bookstore or you go to Amazon and buy a book. That's perhaps what you're going to find. So Michael Garner was an anthropologist, researcher, author, and essentially put together the pieces that looked the same. He did a wide study, a wide cataloging of all of the so-called shamanic cultures that had been studied up to this point in the 80s, and then just smashed it together. First off, and this is a quote from his biography, which I do not like, stripped of specific cultural contexts as to render them accessible to contemporary Western spiritual seekers. I find issue with that wording. Though I am certain that his heart and the heart of people who follow core shamanism are absolutely in the right place, not the wrong place, I'm sorry. Essentially, it focuses in certain techniques, but essentially it focuses on shamanic journeying with rapid drum rattles or drum beats or rattling to enter an altered state of mind and contact spirits. It also includes, of course, working with power animals, which is Harner's terminology, also known as guardian spirits or animal spirits, or just guardians. It includes a great deal of animistic beliefs that we're going to see in a little bit. And he specifically cited inspiration from Siberian folk, Mexican and Guatemalan culture that survives to this day, indigenous ones, Australian Aboriginal traditions, and even a splash of European occultism, since we do have some lingering inspirations from our own ancient past. Essentially, he layered them on top of each other and saw what confirmed what. So here we have some more pictures, some of which are a lot more familiar to us, or should be more familiar to us. We have an Alaska medicine person. We have the May Queen, probably not of the last, definitely not of the last Beltane celebration in Edinburgh. Probably way before coronavirus. They had to cancel it this year. And we have a Korean shaman carrying out practices that have survived in that part of the world. So as you can see, there are similarities and there are also differences. So here are some of those core shamanic ideas. Number one, everything is interrelated and interdependent. I'm sure that sounds familiar to us, right? This, however, doesn't necessarily line up with every single culture you could study. Not absolutely every indigenous culture was automatically more environmentally friendly than ours. Many were, but many picked and chose what they were going to be environmentally friendly towards. Things that were aligned better with their lifestyle, with their available pieces of nature. So number one, expressed as a universal, is more of a modern conceit. Comes very much after the age of Rachel Carson and the modern environmental movement. Number two is pretty widespread, so I have nothing to pick with that. Pretty much all cultures and all religions all over the world have said that there is an ordinary and a non-ordinary reality going on. You know, spirits and matter. This life, the next life. This world, the other world. You know. Number three is also not necessarily true for all traditional societies. You will find, if you study the works of many Native people in their own tellings, that there is sometimes an equal importance placed to this world and the other worlds. Because after all, surviving here and now is the pressing need, the pressing reality. And that is, in the end, what the shaman has to accomplish or help his people accomplish. Number four is also not necessarily widely realized. For example, I mentioned Holloway and his work among the Ojibwe. They don't necessarily believe that all things are alive and have spirits. The researcher asked, so do you believe that all rocks are alive? And the medicine person said, well, no, not all rocks are alive, but some are, and many can be. So it is a trick. It is, well, not necessarily a trick, but it is the work of the shaman to figure out which pieces of nature are to be spoken to and to give the proper respect and acknowledgement to them. Four more. Number five is you can access other states of being and other realities. That is common to every single religion in the world. We don't have to parse that out. Even the Christians believe that. They can pray, and if the prayers can reach the heavens, therefore it is true. Right? It is a truism for every single belief system. The sixth one is not. The core shamanism tends to split the world into 3 levels: upper, lower, and middle. And if anybody here knows, I mean, just to give one example, of the 9 worlds of Norse mythology, you will quickly get into a bind trying to sort things out, even though there's 9 of them and they split evenly into thirds, right? So many different societies had many different other worlds, not necessarily 3. Some had 2, 5, 10, 11, infinite amounts. Some had none, and everything was just mixed within this world. So for some people, it wasn't an understanding of other worlds that you had to go to. It was also, this world has little folds and pockets of reality where it is subtly different. I mean, we've all felt that. We've all been in a place, usually in nature, that feels just different. Like everything is super possible in that one spot. Number 7, shamans seek out spirits to cause change in this world. Very true. This is an orientation towards this world, where the work has to translate to our lives, to help us live in the now, and to survive. And number 8, again, pretty standard for pretty much every religion. No need to pick just shamans. We might as well say any faith. So as you can see, there is a mix here of universals, a belief that almost everybody understands and knows, and then some things that don't quite apply to absolutely every shamanic society. So while that doesn't make core shamanism as a practice invalid, it does mean that it is not universally shared with all other traditional belief systems in the world, that everybody has different spices to cook with. Okay, more pictures. But also going into a somewhat difficult topic. So I wouldn't be pulling my weight if I did not mention this particular criticism has been levied against core shamanism, has put forth by Michael Garner. It is the charge of cultural appropriation. And this is especially true when it is being sold or commodified for profit. The native people all over the world have this lovely phrase that they call non-indigenous shamanic practitioners plastic shamans, where they themselves don't even use that word. This is an issue that, of course, comes up sometimes in our type of spirituality. And I think that the way it is written is specifically important, sold for profit. Okay, that's where the line really gets crossed. Everybody all over the world has borrowed from one belief system or another throughout all of history. As an anthropologist, I can guarantee you that. As I said before, traditional cultures all over the world are highly syncretic. They mix and match based on what they encounter, based on what they see. The problem, of course, becomes when it is a theft of something that belongs to a marginalized group. Of course, and many modern shamans will argue that they're just trying to revive some lost animistic tradition out of ancient Europe. And the only real way to do that is to find the patterns and commonalities that exist across all cultures, and thus have a good chance of also having been present in Europe and the Mediterranean world, right? So that's a good starting point for reconstruction. But for example, while many musical groups attempting to revive folk Norse music will absolutely have drums, there is zero evidence of drums in archaeological record in Scandinavia. What does that mean? Well, could mean a few things. I mean, leather and deer skin that is used for the drums surface does not get preserved in the archaeological record, no matter how anaerobic the bog you tossed it into, right? It does not get preserved. And then again, those were cultures where everyone, men, women, children, old people, every single person probably had access to a shield, which if you shape it right, makes a sound a lot like a drum. So did they not have drums, or did they have drumming sounds in their music? That is a debate that cannot truly be answered with scholarship, can it? So there is no clear-cut answer to this critique. There is absolutely no clear-cut answer. There is a personal answer here, one that you have to look into yourself and find your place, because there's an argument for both sides here. Okay, I find that the Wiccan read helps. I always find that the Wiccan read helps, even though I'm not technically Wiccan anymore. And harm ye none, do what you will. Harm ye none. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, cut through all the bullshit. So here's some ways, and here I'm showing you some reconstructionists. I believe this is in Denmark. It's hard to find sometimes. Then, you know, the ubiquitous Obolone shell with the sage bundle, and then the drums with the hippies. So, you know, we have a cultural mixing going on. And like every single time that cultures have mixed and have exchanged ideas, it will take some time to figure out what the boundaries will be. Here's to live up to the read. Here are some ways that I can imagine for harm reduction, right? And harm ye none. Well, let's reduce our harm, because inevitably we will harm. You can buy supplies from native businesses and native persons. So yes, you can use white sage, just buy from a native person. And then your mind is probably drawing a blank. It's like, oh my God, where do I find a native person to buy white sage from? And that's pretty simple. Just go to a powwow. Go to a powwow or an arts and crafts fair. There will be vendors. Buy it from them. Don't claim authority in another person's culture, because it will be our misfortune that they will find us and they will put us in our place. And also, it's not nice. It's not nice. And finally, support Indigenous struggles whenever possible. Here we have front and center, the big picture, the current pipeline struggle, mostly happening in Canada, but it will also affect the United States. Here we are. These are types of actions that one can take to reduce the harm that could potentially be caused by crossing over cultural lines and learning from other cultures that are still very much alive and recovering from colonialism. So now that we're done through the horrible part, how does one do shamanism? All right, how does one do shamanism? What does it mean to be a shaman? It means seeking and maintaining relationships with spirits. That is the shortest possible, most succinct definition that I could possibly dig out of my brain. Seeking and maintaining. And you will begin to realize, I'm hoping that many of you are realizing, hey, I kind of do that already. And that's true. We all kind of do that. Of course, there are different ways that makes us specifically shaman. I will say that spirit work in an animist practice requires journey work. That is the unique angle that comes from quote unquote shamanism, journey work. That means spirit flight, what some might call shamanic journeying. I call it spirit journeying because shamanic is not a good word. It doesn't apply to every single technique that we could possibly get. So I already done workshops about seeking and maintaining sort of some spirit contacts, and I will be doing a workshop, part 2, which will focus solely on journey work. That's it, just journey work, because it is so central and so important. So I will just be kind of brief about the whole thing and then go into some more detail in other ways. Seeking and maintaining relationships and contacts with spirits becomes an extension of befriending another person. Because in the end, in an animistic worldview, that is what spirits are. That is what nature is. It's other people who are not like you, but can be worked with just like any other people. Because in the end, aren't we all a little bit different? Well, the plants, the rocks, the trees, the wind, all the same. They're just people, very different from you. But you can reach out. It incorporates something that is being called a lot these days, the liminal, and well, which is not new to our people, but also the imaginal, which is not imagination, but it is an other realm of possibility. It is the place where our dreams are actually and absolutely real. It hangs between this world and the other worlds. And it is sort of the power source that we can access to get through these experiences in a good way. Yeah, so essentially I'm telling you, treat nature like a friend, right? Check in with nature, say hello to nature, give thanks to your chosen piece of nature, as in offerings. Talk and contact them in whatever way best suits you. Each one of us is going to be somewhat different. Now, my jam is journey work, and it just happens to be the central tenet of shamanism. So this is what I'm teaching. But you may be a dream traveler. You may be a diviner with pendulum or with other methods. You might just very simply have a wonderful green thumb, and you can take these plants into your living spaces and tend to them and create that reciprocal relationship. Because at the end of the day, that is what it boils down to. To give an example, when I just moved into this house that I'm in, I found the oak at the very corner of the property. It's a condominium area, so it's not my oak, but it is big, it is huge, and it has lived for longer than I have. Therefore, it is venerable. And I went up to the oak and I tried to make contact. I opened my mind, see what I could get. Garbled images, passing thoughts. Sometimes nature doesn't know how to communicate with you. It doesn't speak your language because nobody has ever talked to it, especially trees in urban environments. And then I was like, okay, I will try again. Then the next day I brought it some water. And then I put some little fairy houses around it. Not because the fairies are gonna move in, but because it's a gift, a decoration. I gave it trinkets. We all like trinkets. Every single person likes trinkets. And then it got the first communication. Hey, I like shiny things. I was like, okay, shiny things you're getting when I come from work. And I studied it with tiny little bits of well, essentially straws. And one nice pinwheel. One nice pinwheel, very, very shiny, loved it. And then I just kept adding and having a relationship with the tree, and I check in until I eventually moved on to doing some of the deeper work that I've picked up through my journey in paganism. Rituals that are done with people, I've done with that tree as a partner. I had to first kind of present it to the gods and be like, is this okay? Am I doing good? And the gods were like, yes, good boy, you're doing good. And so, you know, now they are a ritual partner with me sometimes. Oh, did I click on the next one? Yes, I did. So as you can see, there are a lot of practices here which are already embedded in today's paganism, especially stuff from traditional witchcraft, which is the folkloric magic of our ancient homelands. A lot of it has survived, a lot of it has been recreated, a lot of it has been found in literary sources. Take it with a pinch of salt and you enjoy the flavor. But not the grimoire traditions of the late Middle Ages, because this embeds a great deal of control, this mentality of control over spirits, over nature, which is not at all conducive to a shamanic practice. You will find that the moment you try to command the spirit is the moment you're deserted by all the spirits. There is no commanding the spirits when you're in this relational path, because you approached it like a friend and then you betrayed it. Then you commanded it. So if you're going to command, if that is your personality, and I am not judging you, then begin by commanding. And that is what you do. But don't lie to the spirits. They will desert you. And then, get ready. Bad luck will follow you. Here are some more practices, just a list of things. Divining for water, or essentially anything that is a common resource, a useful resource. A divination, especially done with dowsing rods, great practice. That is a folk practice that has survived and has survived in our culture and can be seen essentially anywhere. And the good part of it is that it trains your mind to interact with the subtle energies, to interact with the spirits, so that you open those channels of communication while you're walking around nature with a stick in your hands. And you maybe are finding water and you lost objects, and who knows what else you're finding. Herbcraft, study herbs. I cannot put it more succinctly. The best way to learn how to work with spirits is to first work with plants. Plants are there and are already in a relationship with you, because they require water and sunlight, and they're found in a pot in your house. So you will have to take care of that plant as if it is a friend. It is a mandatory relationship. And then so many of them have medicinal and magical uses that you could also learn from. Now, here's what I don't recommend, because I am not an herb witch. I have the blackest of thumbs. You give me a live plant, it will be dead. I don't care what it is, a cactus, a lichen, it will be dead. So here's what I have learned, the way I've tried to approach it. I approach it one herb at a time, usually dried. And to make sure that I'm not spending a lot of money on my herbs, I just get it from, I get the ones that are in Walmart. You know, they sell thyme, they sell rosemary, they sell a whole bunch of things at Walmart for like $1 or $2. Then I dry it in my house, and then I interact with the plant for the rest of however long that supplies last me. My husband, Aiden, he is much better at growing plants. You should see his little plant stand that he's working on. I'm sure he's gonna go his own way in Earthcraft, but this non-herbal witch, one at a time. I'm working on rosemary right now. So giving spiritual counseling is absolutely a thing that happens in shamanism. And that might be a scary and intimidating thing to take on, because so few of us have actual counseling degrees, and it is a profession with lots of training, and it is perhaps something that we might be reluctant to embrace. But I'm not saying that the modern shaman has to counsel people through divorce, through mental illness, or whatever it may be. I am saying that you listen and you give help when your friends are in need. Because currently that is your community, your friends, right? I know that in Fort Lauderdale and Broward, you guys have a much larger community. So who knows how it will apply there. I will leave that up to the organizers and the leaders of that community to give guidance on this particular topic. Natural spell casting, and that is just regular spell casting, to be honest. Shamans cast spells. Sometimes they cast curses, very famously. They've cast so many interesting curses over a lot of tribal history. Ecstatic dancing, and that can be to any music. It doesn't have to be a rapid drum beat. You can go to the club and shake your booty to whatever song you want. The point is so you let go and you just flow with the music, whatever your music is. Just pump it up real loud so you can hear yourself here I mean, think and dance. Dance past the point of being tired. Or move in whatever ways you're able to move. But feel the ecstasy within. Quicken your heartbeat. Finally, of course, community rituals in a leadership capacity, and the fight for nature is ever ongoing. Fight for nature is ever ongoing. In a way, we are already somewhat shamanic. This is, I would not call it the ancient religion, the Neolithic religion. I wouldn't call it that, but I will say that it is within the DNA of humanity. Okay? Of course, we add belief systems and practices, and we change them, and we adapt them to our circumstances. But at the end of the day, we're all talking and working with spirits, whether we know it or not. So remain rooted, honorable, and wise. This comes to the end of my presentation. I do have some Q&A material that if you can read the font, I don't know how big this shows up in your screen. I will be happy to go through it with you if you want me to read specific portions of it. So you can unmute as I go and either share comments or ask more questions.
There's a comment on the chat from Laura.
Oh.
I remember reading about shamanism, and the book mentioned having a near-death experience or some other type of extreme experience as an initiation into shamanism. Is that usually the case?
Very, very good question. Something that I was considering talking about, but I couldn't quite bring myself all the way around to it in the presentation itself. Such experiences are much more common in traditional cultures of Northeastern Asia, so Siberia essentially, and some native tribes here in North America. It is a little less common in other parts of the world. But core shamanism does take it as one of its potential core ideas. It is the ordeal that initiates, and it refers to this idea, which is itself not necessarily as pristine as one might think, of the shaman undergoing a severe illness or a literal accident that dismembers them. And of course, one has to wonder, right, exactly how it happened, because there are accounts of the shaman saying, yes, they tied me up to a post and ripped me limb from limb. And then through the power of the spirits, I got myself together. Now that echoes the story of Osiris. And many people are like, yes, see, there's links across cultures, but I'm like, hold up, that's not necessarily true. The Egyptians might have believed that this was possible, but Osiris was a god. So maybe chill out a little bit with the dismemberment. It is possible. And many people take it as a sign after undergoing a health-related ordeal that their abilities are more open, that they're chosen by the spirits to lead a particular life and undergo a particular training through this particular type of spirituality. But it is not universal. Like, don't jump off a cliff to become a shaman.
You see similarities to Osiris.
No.
I see similarities to Odin.
Yes, of course.
But it's just another way of getting into achieving an altered state of mind. That extreme level of stress is going to make you think differently, and then you're going to see things that you could not see before.
Yes, yes, it is definitely a way. Something else that I left for the next time. You are touching upon different methods of achieving trance states or altered states of mind, and also reality. So there's the inhibitory, which is what we usually use, The healing circle was definitely an inhibitory experience, which quiets your mind, calms your emotions, settles you down. And then there is the excitatory, and that could lead you all the way up to ecstasy. But past ecstasy, there is more beyond that. And that is where the extreme bodily events happen. Yes, you're right, Broom. Also, hi, Broom.
Another message from Laura in the chat. The trance states compared to the brainwave states like alpha, theta, and gamma.
Okay, so there is research that has been done on this, and about 8 years ago, I used to know all about it. I don't know where it's gone since then. I haven't honestly heard of an update, but here's what has been found. It is similar, but not entirely the same. For example, it will start with a dream quality state, or like, the alpha that begins to calm you down and bring you down, but where it's supposed to kick into REM, it goes into a different pathway of the brain. It links up with, oh Jesus. So this is why I don't know things anymore. I've not been an academic for very long now. It's an up and down control method that keeps your focus. What you use to focus on then gets linked up with dream experience, and it becomes like a hyper lucid dream that launches you somewhere else. And instead of the wild and unpredictable brain activity of REM, it becomes even more hyperactive, and it unlocks even more parts of your mental capacity. But it also shuts a bunch of them down. Like, the brain is a balance. It excites a bunch, and then it shuts down a bunch.
Should I, a white person, use trance in inducing techniques and work with spiritual travel? I would say one more step on that is, as a white person, I'm very hesitant to call what I do shamanic practices, even though I know they are. And I just find other ways to describe things. I have a deep connection with nature. I can talk about spirits, and I can talk about my practices. I just have to avoid certain vocabulary, which it sounds very hypocritical of me.
It's not. It's also where I'm at. I've defaulted to call myself animist, because that is essentially an academic term, and I can definitely lay claim to anthropology as a place of where I come from, even though I'm also Cuban. I'm comfortable with animist. It is the underpinning philosophy, the underpinning ontology for most of shamanic traditions and ideas. So yes, I feel you. I don't know what to do with a lot of it, but at the same time, I'm here telling all of you that you should do this. You should definitely do this. It opens up your perception in such a wonderful way, even if you just dip your toes in it. Of course, the ideal is that you won't need the drum and the rattle to take you to your journey. The idea is that your mind will be both open and filtering enough that you can converse with the spirits and with nature. Let's see, my chosen book is Sandra Ingerman. And I mean, my chosen author, she studied with Michael Garner, so she has a pretty undiluted path to the original formulation of core shamanism. And this is the one that I recommend to absolutely everyone. It is very short.
Okay, I'm just taking a screenshot, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Being recorded.
And it's very no nonsense, and it includes some amazing drumming tracks that she has recorded. She is one of those people that has a sense of music that will transport you. So when she takes out the drums or the rattles, you will go to where you need to go. Like, that is the book that got me journeying. And I've come back to it a million times, and I'm like, well, other than all the myths and the stories and the specific cultural practices, this is the primer. This is where you start. Of course, there are other great books, but this is the one that I'm talking about.